Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 2 of an ongoing series focused on endpoint protection capabilities in Microsoft Intune, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. The focus of today's discussion will be to detail the capabilities for managing antivirus that's installed on Windows as well as Mac OS. So we'll talk about both. Here's a bit of an agenda as we go through these discussions. So first, why are we discussing this, right? So really, the why about why we're discussing this applies to all of the training sessions we have, but I kind of highlight it here because the features we're talking about are security-based features, and this is all about awareness. Making sure that you understand what is built in, what you have at your fingertips to manage the capabilities that are built in, at least to the Windows side, right? What you decide to do with that information is up to you. But at least knowing about what's there and how to configure it and seeing it kind of work and get a sense that way, pretty big deal. So want to make sure you have that. Also, the potential cost savings. If you are paying a third-party product for antivirus services, then we give you in Windows endpoint protection, and so that may be something you already own. It totally depends on your licensing. If you have E5, check it out, right? And that's about all I'll say about licensing, but certainly a reason that we talk about this. Also, with Intune, which is our focus here, really, okay, fine, tangent, I should call it the Endpoint Manager console. I will. I'll also call it the Intune console because that's what it was called for so long. But, talking about the Intune console, Endpoint Manager, Config Manager, all of the things that we've talked about so far, in this session, if this is interesting to you, there is likely a team of security folks at your organization, and they probably care about security, but don't really care about the rest of Endpoint Manager. And so being able to craft a custom experience for them to get their work done and monitor and so on in the Endpoint Manager console through role-based access controls, which we have, is an important thing. So this is the general agenda that we're going to follow in this session, and let's just jump right in, right? So what are antivirus policies? So we probably all know what antivirus is. Most of us have that. If you don't have it, you're probably infected by malware. But just to go through it, antivirus policy is all about protection against malware, against threats, even against some ransomware, type things. Having flexible controls is a key thing for policy so that you can set things just as you need to set them, such as scan schedule or the file types and folders to scan or to exclude from scanning, and real-time protection, remediation actions if you do find malware, on a device and so on. So all of those things are defined by antivirus policy. So why do we care about that, right? Well, whenever we're talking about using a product such as Intune or Endpoint Manager or Config Manager even, we're not talking about just managing a few systems. We're likely talking about managing hundreds or thousands of systems. And so having that enterprise management capability that's proven, that works really well and can deliver consistent, flexible, predictable, concise, responses is a very, very important thing. And one little tangent on the concise side. So one of the things, a little bit of a tangent here. So when Intune was first introduced, honestly, I was not a huge fan of the console. I found it to be kind of confusing, and you could end up in several blind alleys and so on. Huge, massive, massive improvement since then. But what you're going to find is that there are policies that are available to configure things that are in device config policy, right? But you'll find other policies there too. And so it can sometimes get a little bit confusing to bring all of the right policies together for a given function. So antivirus policies are built to do that. So you're going to find some of the same settings in your antivirus policy that you might find other places, such as in Device Configuration Policy. You're going to see some things that are similar to Device Compliance Policy. So know that these these policy types are going to include extra settings that can complicate perhaps the task of configuring just antivirus. And so bringing all of the antivirus specific things together into one node just really tries to simplify that whole process. So what are the requirements for actually setting up antivirus policy? Well, certainly you need Intune or, again, Endpoint Manager Console. You need a supported OS, right? So on the Windows side, that's Windows 8.1, Windows 10, Server 2012 R2, Server 2016, Server 2019. And wait a minute, Steve, I can hear you maybe saying, you just said that this was going to be in the Intune console. Yeah, it is, right? But wait a minute, none of those, did y'all all of a sudden add MDM support to Server 2012 R2 and 2016 and 2019? How in the world are we able to manage those? Good question, right? And here's a good answer. So remember I said that this used to be called the Intune console? It did, because all of the things that you could do within this console were only possible through MDM. That's not the case anymore. And so in the Endpoint Manager Console, there's certainly things that you need the MDM channel to do, but there's other things that you can configure and deploy to your managed devices that happen to be managed by Configuration Manager using the Configuration Manager client. That's called Tenant Attach. And so you're seeing more and more of those things show up in the in the Endpoint Manager Console, almost said Intune, where you can directly configure those settings from that single console, and then you need to weigh what does it mean that we now have these tenant attach kind of capabilities that are growing all the time. What does it mean that we have co-management? What do we do in the situation? There's certainly good things to ponder, right? And it's not necessarily that you won't necessarily choose one or the other. They can work together, right? And again, just understanding these capabilities. We'll circle back to that more in a minute, and you'll see that more in a minute. So Mac OS, right? We'll talk about Mac OS. And so for Mac OS, that's any supported version of the Mac OS, right? So there's additional things that you might have to do, or that you do have to do for certain versions of Mac OS. We'll talk about those, such as Big Sur, right? In all cases, you're going to need to have the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint app installed on that Mac OS to be able to receive and work with the policies. But again, we'll talk about that more in a minute. You also will need to have a supported management scenario. Well, what does that mean? Good question. I'll tell you about that more on the next page. Last thing, kind of loosely here, but I want to call it out, is you need your device to be compliant for a whole lot of reasons beyond just antivirus. But you need to have something in place to determine the compliance of your device. So the good news is, on the Windows side, we have default Windows compliance policies in place. So whenever you enroll a Windows device, it's going to assess against those policies. The compliance policy basically is an empty policy that has no requirements on it, and so the device will be compliant. Mac OS does not have a default compliance policy, and so you'll need to put one in place in order for your Macs to show compliant. We also, by the way, have default compliance policies for Android and iOS as well. Not sure why we don't have one for Mac, but easy enough to create. All right. So in terms of scenarios, what are we talking about? Well, I've mentioned them already. Two big bucket scenarios. You are either going to manage your devices with antivirus policy through MDM, which would be Windows 10. Well, it doesn't have to be Windows 10, but the choices are Windows 10, Windows 8.1, and Mac in this case, right? Again, you don't have to use MDM with Windows 10 and Windows 8.1. You probably should, right? And at least have co-management. But those are what we're talking about when we talk about Intune directly. Then Tenant Attach would be one of those other operating systems, like the server operating systems I mentioned, or basically any operating system managed by the config manager client that is also supported for antivirus policy deployment, right? So again, you'll see these as we go along. And so now we get to the fun part, actually setting this up. So let me grab the console. The Endpoint Manager console is what I want to grab. Say that right. All right, here we go. So what I want to do first in terms of configuring is just walk you through where we go to configure and some of the configuration options that I have. And so to get to the antivirus, surprisingly, we're going to go to Endpoint Security. And under Endpoint Security, we have, hey, antivirus. So all of these things that you see here, well, most of these things that you see here we'll cover in this series. Some of them we've already covered, but if you see something here that's interesting, just check, and there may already be another video that covers it, or I'm working on it. So stand by, but we'll be in the antivirus section for now. And so just a quick overview. Under the summary, we list, hey, how many devices are, pending, or, have any kind of issues going on, or pending a restart, or whatever, right? So it's a nice little, overview dashboard. Then we'll see our policies down below that we'll get to. But while we're here, we also have a Windows 10 unhealthy endpoints section that we have. Now, this is my lab, so there's nothing unhealthy here, but it's a good section to check. And then also any indications of active malware that's in the environment. Again, my lab, so nothing really here. So let's go back to the summary tab. And I want to walk you through again the configurations. And I'm going to do it in 3 buckets, MDM, Tenant Attach, and then Mac OS. But let's start assuming that we were building policy for the beginning ourselves, and then we'll go into the specifics. So, and let me just tell you, again, I'm approaching this from the discussion point of how to use Endpoint Manager / Intune to manage these devices. I'm not really digging into the specifics of the policy. A lot of this is going to make sense just as you see it, but my perspective is how to manage it, and then you can decide what policy settings apply. But as you go in here, there's a couple of options. The first thing is you want to choose your platform. So this is Windows 10 and later. Actually, yeah, Windows 10 and later, right? For MDM. I think I said Windows 8.1, but Windows 10 and later for MDM. Mac OS also for MDM. And then here is our Tenant Attach, which also is Windows 10 and server. I said Windows 8.1 in error, but either way, probably not many people have Windows 8.1 anymore. So we'll start with the first one, Windows 10 and later. Then we have to choose a particular profile. So there's 3 different profiles that we will choose from, and we have each configured, and we will look at each. Then if we choose Mac OS, we will have just one profile, and that is to configure the antivirus. We'll talk about that. And then finally, if we choose this one and see Config Manager, we know it's Tenant Attach, and we'll have 2 profiles that we choose from. So let's go look at each one and see how they're configured. So these top 3 are going to be for MDM. And you see that I only have one deployed. Let's go ahead and blow this up a little bit so we can see. Oh, this is macOS. Sorry, these 3 are for Windows 10. I still just have one of them deployed. Let's start here. So here's the Windows Defender Antivirus Policy. And you see it's deployed. And you see that I have 2 conflicts, which we'll get to in just a minute. But let's walk through just what you have as far as configuration options, and then we'll go on. So you see that I have this assigned. So it's assigned to a group of Windows 10 devices. And then to see how this is configured, I'll go and look at, I'm curious what that is. I don't know if I've paid attention to that before. Yeah, okay, so I can even just see the settings right here, so I don't have to click on edit. That's actually cool. So I have all of these buckets of settings, and so here I can choose the cloud protection settings that I want to use, and I'll see how they're configured. So this is actually a cool view to see how things are configured. Let me go edit these, and we'll see them a little bit closer. So here's our cloud protection settings. You see I have a couple of things configured, right? So bear that in mind as we go along. And then here's a section where I can configure my antivirus exclusions in terms of file types or paths or whatever. Real-time protection settings and what I want to choose there in terms of enabling it, what to do with it, and so on. Again, not going through every single one of these settings, but just showing them to you so you know what's here. Here's the remediation options, and I do have a couple of things configured here in terms of, hey, it's a low threat, user-defined, moderate threat, allow high threat or severe threat, quarantine or clean. And you can do obviously what you want to do in that section. I just include it to show it to you. Here's scan settings and so on that you can choose. And then updates. Now this is interesting because you will need to get antivirus updates, and so you get to choose how you want to download those definition updates. You can always add additional options. There are 4 there by default. I've chosen that I will use, well, so let me just go in and look at this 2 items. So I've chosen that I will use my internal definition update server first, and then if I don't have that Microsoft Update server, I can add another one, and then you'll see the different options if I click on the drop down. So there's 4 choices, right? And then lastly, user experience. What do I want for that in terms of allow users access to the Defender app or not, right? And so that's what I have configured for this one. So I'm just going to, and I have this deployed, so you'll see it in a minute. So I'm just going to cancel this one and then close here. Then we'll go look at the other one, one of the other ones. And so here's my Defender antivirus exclusion. So this one's interesting, and I'm not exactly sure why we have this. Maybe because of duplicate policies going together and being able to craft an experience, whatever. But here is just simply that configuration setting for exclusions. So you saw this exact setting a moment ago in the broader list of settings. So we have this standalone as well, if for some reason you need to use it. And then the last one is the security experience and the settings associated. So we go to properties on that. This one's not deployed, but just to show you the options on that. So here is what you can choose from. So essentially, this is defining whether the user can interact with the app and what you want to hide and different things, right? So you can browse this and create. You can even create custom messages, and I put some silly things in here just for fun as I've gone through, right? Okay. And people, whenever I've done this session before, people have asked, hey, is DuckDuckGo a real website? And yes, in fact, it's a real search engine. Go take a look if you're interested. Right? Okay. So that I've got one of my Windows 10 only and later policies deployed. You'll see that in just a minute, but let me keep going. So down here, I have my Tenant Attach. And so let me show you the options available for the Tenant Attach. And basically, you can see a summary. I've got a couple of errors here. I don't know what they are. I don't really care. I just want to show you the policy and that it's deployed for this. And so if I go into this policy and look at the configuration options here, you'll see that there's a lot of the same options, right? Some differences for sure, but a lot of the options are the same in terms of cloud protection and the big buckets. And then within the buckets, there might be some difference for sure, right? Like when we get to the update section, you'll see, and then when we get to the remediation section, you'll see that these boxes are collapsed down for some reason. The same options exist. Not sure why they're collapsed down, but still. Scan options are here. And then you have updates option, and the options for the updates are a bit different, but still there. And then user experience, you have just a couple of buttons, right? So I have this deployed, and we'll see that it's deployed in just a moment. Then you have the Windows security experience that you can deploy through Tenant Attach. And you saw a couple of options on the one just a moment ago. Here we have all of one option. So let's go edit the configuration settings. And you'll see that one option is either enabled or disabled or not configured. right? Okay, and then last one we'll look at is for Mac OS. And so here's where we can deploy settings to the Mac OS. You see that it's deployed. And let me go ahead and show you the properties for this and the configuration settings. You see it's assigned to the Mac group that I have created. And so just a few settings, right? But you have the basic stuff you need in terms of scanning, in terms of excluded files and directories and so on from scans. And so these are options for you. Again, on Mac, you need the Defender app installed to be able to deploy this. And, you know, while I'm here, might as well, let me just show you. I've got a couple of these deployed. So let me show you that for the Mac, I have per setting status, and you can tell right away, hey, these are deployed and successful. Now I just have one Mac. And so if I had multiple, you would see that number increase accordingly, or any conflicts that are out there, or any errors that are out there. But this is a really good dashboard to be able to understand what's actually going on the device. And then also, let me just show you while I'm here, the one that I have deployed here, which is the Defender Antivirus. And if I look at per setting, you'll see that I have a bunch of them, and they're all deployed, except I have two conflicts. Here's the first one, and then down near the bottom is the second one. So it's a really, again, good dashboard to be able to understand what's actually going on. And then I've already shown you the tenant attach where it says error. Don't know why. You'll see that it's there in a moment. It's not compliant, so I could dig in, but for right now, I don't care that much. Okay, so that's setting everything up and getting everything ready for our production deployment and so on, right? Now, let's actually go and see what this looks like on the individual devices. And so the first thing I'm going to do is pull in my managed Intune managed, MDM managed device, I should say. Let me find it, first of all, in my long list of VMs. There it is. All right, oops, it came up strange. Do that again. Come on. Come on. There. Okay. So logging into it. Okay, so I have this assigned. Well, how do I know that I have it assigned? Well, I've already shown you one way that in the Endpoint Manager console, I can see that the settings are deployed. But how do I validate that on the client? Well, there's a couple of ways for sure. You could dig into the individual CSP settings and track all of that down in the registry and see what it's set to. And sometimes that's necessary, but the easiest way is to simply just launch settings. Well, I won't even do that. I will do Windows Security app, and in the Windows Security app, we're going to have a section for virus and threat protection. And in this, we'll have a place where we can look at all of our settings. So I'll look at my settings, and you notice, hey, this setting is managed by your admin, me, and real-time protection is turned on. Then if I scroll down, so is cloud delivered protection. You notice I told you to keep that in mind that I have that configured. So it's on, and this also indicates that it's managed by the admin. Scroll on down, automatic sample submission, I did not turn on. That's managed by the user. If you allow that, tamper protection is turned off. Now, I think I scrolled by tamper protection. Let me explain what tamper protection is. This actually tells you, prevent others from tampering with important security features. Basically, preventing access to certain things that you don't want the user to even have knowledge of or mess with, right? So this is managed by me because I told the property to, enable it, I think, either way, whatever I set it to. And that's there, right? So just an easy, quick way to be able to validate that everything is configured as it should be, okay? Now, what about tenant attach? So I showed you in the console that it shows in an error state right now, but in fact, it is that does indicate that it's made its way down. So I'm just going to pull in a domain controller in my lab and show it to you. So I showed you on the config manager side that whenever we deploy anti-malware settings in config manager, that we will see them on the configuration tab of the client applet, right? So we configured the settings in the section for Tenant Attach. And so the idea is we'll configure those settings. They'll get communicated down to the config manager system. Config manager will communicate those settings down to the client. Now, I want to talk to you more about this in just a minute. Let me just show you this first. So if you look on the configurations tab, you'll see, in fact, that I do have this demo set up. It does have the settings appropriately. Now, it does say non-compliant, but it's here, right? So that whole process has worked. I've gone from the Endpoint Manager console down to the Config Manager site server, down through policy to the client, and we have this. In fact, even though it shows non-compliant, if we look in Defender, Security Center, sorry, there we go, and we look at Antivirus here, and we look in the same place, you're going to see that there's certain settings that I'm managing, which implies that, in fact, the policy has made its way down, right? Okay. Now, here's the question, though. How do we actually get this configured? You see it in the Endpoint Manager console. You see it's flagged as Config Manager, so you know it's Tenant Attach. But what do you have to do? Let me get rid of this. What do you have to do to actually get this configured? So there is another session, I think, that I did where I talk about Tenant Attach in detail. But let me go into this and show you what's involved in setting this up. So first, we have the Tenant Attach settings that are part of the co-management settings. So again, these two can be enabled separately. They can be enabled together. In my case, they are enabled together, but you don't have to. So here's where you will specify. So I've already done this, and so what happens is I will sign into my tenant where I want to attach this config manager to the tenant, and it will build that association. It will actually build an app out there, and then I need to configure some settings. Now, here, upload to Endpoint Manager Admin Center. That's why I'm getting my clients from Config Manager uploaded into the Admin Center. Then I have two choices: all devices managed by Config Manager or specific collections of devices. Now, as of this recording, I'll just share this with you. I kept it to all devices for my lab, but our documentation talks about using a collection here. I used a collection and then tried to do the next step I'm about to show you, and it would not happen. It would not work, right? So, in fact, I might just do this. Well, I'm going to walk you through it the right way, then I'll probably break it and show it to you what I'm talking about, assuming it still breaks the way I think. So this is saying all devices go forward into Config Manager, right? Or into Endpoint Manager console. Well, there's another thing you need to do as well. And so here, if you want to enable endpoint analytics, this is not what I was referring to, but this is something you can check off here as well. But there's another thing you need to do as well. So you need to define what devices are going to be allowed to receive endpoint settings from Endpoint Manager. So here I'm doing non-Windows 10 systems. And so remind you of where we are. I'm pushing all of my Config Manager managed systems into Endpoint Manager console, Admin Center. So I'm not choosing a specific collection to synchronize up to the Admin Center. But one of the things I do have to do is I need to make my collection appear as an option when I configure Tenant Attach policy and assign it. I did not show you that on purpose because I wanted to show you this first, right? So when I configure Tenant Attach, whenever I configure Tenant Attach and I want to support some of the endpoint security settings coming down, I have to specify which collections of devices I want to enable that on. So if I go to Properties and I go to Cloud Sync, there is this option says make this collection available to assign endpoint security policies from the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. If I do not turn this on, I will not get those security policies applied. Right? Now, also, if I do not turn this on, I will not see collections synchronized into Endpoint Manager that will allow me to assign the security policy. I'll show you that next, but I wanted to show you this part. In fact, let me close the loop on it, then I'll come back to this and show you what I mean doesn't work, at least right now. So if I go into the Endpoint Manager console, right, and now let me go back to here, and go to a Tenant Attach policy. So here's my Tenant Attach policy that I've deployed. So I breezed by this a moment ago, but notice for my assignments, if you go to any assignment normally in the Endpoint Manager console, you would expect to see a group that's defined in Azure AD or in the Intune section, in the group section. That's not what you have here, right? What you have is you have a collection name that has been synchronized from my on-prem config manager server because I enabled that checkbox in the collection, caused it to push up, right? Now, if I wanted to add another, it would let me see all of the collections that have been synchronized. The only one I've synchronized is this one, so I'm not going to have a choice to add any more. If I wanted to add more, then I could build a collection, check that box, synchronize it up, and that's how this all gets effectively built to deploy to the config manager client, right? Okay, now let me show you what is problematic, okay? So I'm going to cancel this, and it probably won't be problematic when I do it this time because I probably will have demo bad luck, but we'll see. Okay, so let this open up again. For some reason, it takes a second or two, at least in my lab it does. So we're letting that come up. All right, now I'm going to go back to this. And instead of all, I'm going to go in and specify, I'll even specify non-Windows 10. So this is the same collection where I have that flag enabled. So I'm going to hit OK. Notice, nope, cannot be updated. Referenced collections are available to assign policy. So, okay, hey, that tells me something. Okay, let's go try to assign all systems. See what happens here. Okay, so I can do that. So I'm going to hit OK. Great. So that part so far, not a surprise to me. But then I go over here to this collection and let me go into I'm kind of testing some things on the fly here because I had the problem and then I'm trying to recreate it. So let's see. Let me go to Properties here. And now go to Cloud Sync. So this is selected. So in theory, doing it that way, it should be okay. But let me do this and apply. And then do this and apply. Okay, that actually works. So maybe this is going to frustrate me. Let me try this one. Let me try this one, since this is the one I specified. Okay, so let me click the box here. Okay, that's what I was expecting to get. The one that I had for the non-Windows 10, I had configured that way already, which means it's probably okay, and that's why it's allowing me to do it. But any collection I now go to, it's going to tell me, nope, you can't do that. No, you can't, right? But then if I go to, let me go to another collection. Let's do the Windows 10 collection just to show you. Device collections. Here's Windows 10 devices that are certainly alive and well, so should be getting synced up to Endpoint Admin Center. Let's go to Properties and go to Cloud Sync and try this here. Apply. Well, that's interesting. So there's something weird here. I don't know exactly what it is, but what I've found works reliably and consistently is that if we go in and set all devices to synchronize forward, that everything seems to work okay. All right, so let me just go back and set that so I don't forget to do it and then get frustrated later. So here, we'll do that, apply. Okay, all good. So I wanted to show that to you to kind of close the loop on how all of that works, right? And so then the normal troubleshooting, you can see all of that synchronization happening with the various logs on the server side that keeps Tenant Attach going and in sync and all that, right? Now, let me show you Mac OS. But before, and the Mac OS, I'll tell you kind of a spoiler, the Mac OS is not going to be all that exciting because, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but there is a bit of a precursor that I want to take you through before we get there. So in the Endpoint Manager console, because of some requirements Apple has applied to their later OS builds, you have to have certain configurations in place before you can even deploy the Endpoint Protection app to the Mac. So you saw that I have this Mac antivirus setting configured and deployed. It's out there. It shows that the settings are applicable. But I could not do that until I had the Endpoint Manager app deployed. Well, here is the Endpoint Manager app, and it's deployed and it's required, so it installed, no problem. And it's pretty easy to add. You just simply go under Mac and choose Defender for Endpoint, and then we'll let me show you. We'll pop it up. You can select it. You can go give the details, and then you can change whatever you want and ultimately assign it to your group of interest. And then it goes out if you have it required. Unless you're running Big Sur, right? And so if you're running Big Sur, I deployed that and it would not go anywhere and it would not install at all. Maybe I just didn't wait enough. I don't know. But my suspicion is because on Big Sur, Apple put in a requirement to affect, I'm not an expert in what I'm about to talk about, but the way it looks to me is basically you have to do some configurations to allow certain things to happen on Big Sur from a management provider such as Intune. And so before you can, if I had something prior to Big Sur, this would probably just work fine, right? But with Big Sur, I needed to go into my configuration profiles and build a couple of configurations. And we do fully document this. The first is what's called an extension. So the way I got there is I would create my profile, and then I have a couple of options, settings, catalog, and then templates. It's on the templates that I have my option for extensions and custom. Oops, scroll on down. So here's extensions and here's custom. Those are the two that I used. So, okay. And so on extension, what I need to do is basically provide some detail that indicates to the Apple device, the Mac OS, that we're good. And so if I go edit my configuration settings, you see there's kernel extensions, which I don't need to do anything. No kernel extensions are configured. And then I have system extensions. And so again, we document exactly what you need to do in this. So I am not configuring the top part, but I am specifying certain allowed system extensions right here. And this comes directly from my documentation, right? These two settings. So that's one option. And then there we use the custom provided the option to supply a custom configuration through Apple's MDM to deploy this configuration on the device. And again, this is documented. Effectively, it's an XML document that will go down and put in place some configurations for payload and approve Microsoft and give an identifier and so on, right? So again, this is how we deploy it. And you saw from the overview, that's out there and green per setting status shows it all good. So does the other one. And so that's out there and good. And again, that is Big Sur forward, not previous to Big Sur, right? So that's important. Then you saw where I went ahead and deployed the Endpoint Protection app. So let's go look at the Mac and see what that looks like. All right, so pulling in my MacBook. So here's my Mac, and I'm just mirroring the screen using Reflector. And so if I go and I just look down here, you'll see that there is a Defender option. If I launch that, it's going to come up and it's going to tell me, okay, hey, something is not configured, right? No license found or whatever. And so here's the challenge. So for this Defender app to work, I need, and to do anything with the internet, whatever, I need to have a test tenant configured. And I don't, because this particular type of test tenant is a little bit more challenging than others to get for a Microsoft employee. So I just haven't pulled it all together. You maybe have one, and if your organization doesn't and wants to build one, out there's tons of advantages to having it. Definitely would encourage that, even if a trial is all you do, just to get familiar with what's out there. But that's it as far as what I can show you on the Mac. You see that the antivirus settings are applied because I showed you that in the Endpoint Manager console. And you see the app is out there, which is required for this. But that's as far as I'm going to take that. The other thing I'll say is, I think I've already said it, is when I deployed the app without those Big Sur specific and forward extension and custom settings, it never showed up, right? As soon as I put those configuration settings out there, it showed right up. So if you're having trouble getting an app to show up, consider possibly that something you might not be configured right, and check and double verify. Okay. So really, that starts to round down the session as to what I wanted to show you. The antivirus capabilities, again, pretty basic. Pretty basic in terms of being able to understand. Most people are familiar with the concept of an antivirus, and so not foreign really at all. But it's important to show it to you and show you the capabilities you have to be able to get some of these things deployed. So with that, we will wrap up this session, and we will see you next time.